Kumsal, first I want to thank you for taking time out of what I know is an extremely busy schedule. I know you're flying to Germany right after this, so please just accept our appreciation for your making time to come and talk to us.
Well, it's genuinely my pleasure, and I really appreciate you having me here today, and I look forward to our chat.
I wanted to start off, before we talk about any issues, I wanted to ask you what it's like to be the first woman to lead Elsevier. It's quite an accomplishment, and I just wonder how you made it happen.
Thank you for that. It's absolutely been a fantastic experience. Elsevier has been around for 140 years, and I'm the first female leader. And the reception has just been overwhelming, both with our employees as well as our customers. So everybody has been very encouraging and supportive, and I felt that positive energy, which has been wonderful. In terms of how did I make that happen, I think, like anything in life, it was hard work and luck are the two usually key ingredients. I would say I have had really, really good mentors as I grew through the ranks. Actually, almost all of them men, one woman, and all of them men, and they've given me a lot of constructive feedback in a way that was easy for me to receive it, that I think made me a better leader, and I'm very grateful for their mentorship. I have always focused on what's the results we can drive, and really try to make progress every day in my career. And I've also have been always a caring member of the community. Actually, earlier in my career, one of my mentors said, Kumsal, you're doing great, but there's one problem. You're too nice. And that really bothered me. And I went and thought about it, and I said, I don't want to be not nice if I'm actually going to progress in my career. And I went to him and I said, I don't think being nice prevents you from actually delivering results, and I'm gonna prove that to you. And for that, I think I need to thank my mother, who's the oldest of four girls, and she's done population control all her life and traveled around the world from Yemen to Bangladesh, so she set a wonderful example for me. And my grandmother, who was one of the first Turkish female lawyers in the first graduating class where they admitted women, and she's also always been a very strong influence in my life. And I think what I've learned from them and what I would tell others is you need to be your authentic self. There is no one style or one way of being successful. It's really important that you can be comfortable in your own skin and be your authentic self.
Yeah, I think that shows. People pick up on that. I agree. But what barriers do you think still need to be overcome to allow other women to assume leadership positions like this?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there are still quite a few barriers. The encouraging thing is if you look at how much progress we've made over the last 30, 40 years, it's enormous in terms of women in the workplace. Approximately half of the employees in the US are women. That doesn't translate into leadership positions yet. And I think there are probably 3 reasons for that. And there's really good focus, I think, on this from communities across the board. So I feel good about the progress we're gonna make. One is just making sure you have an inclusive culture. And I actually don't use the word diversity anymore. I use inclusion, and I say whether you are a woman, a man, white, black, disabled, doesn't matter what your background is. It's really important to have a culture in the workplace where people feel comfortable being who they are. And to me, that's inclusion, and that will drive the right diversity across all of its forms. And there's quite a lot of training, we've done this in Elsevier as well, that can help you with understanding what your unconscious biases may be that you're not aware of, and work on them. And I think people are embracing that. But that's one thing we need to continue to work on in the workplace. The second one is about this sometimes I hear women especially talk about having it all. I think there's no such thing as having it all. I think there are just trade-offs you make in your life, and I think you should be thoughtful about those trade-offs, and make sure that you pick a path that works for your happiness and for your family. So when I mentor women, I say you can continue to work while you have young children, and that's absolutely fine. That's achievable. Or you can take time off and come back, but you need to make the right choice for for your family construct. My husband works as well, so our children are our number one priority, but we have a crazy life. I mean, we do sometimes the whole balance just hangs by a thread, and a tiny little left field unexpected event just creates complete chaos. And then we just need to laugh about it and move on. So that's the second thing. I think people should not focus on having it all. And then the third thing is we do need to encourage women in the pipeline to really work for the senior positions and go for it and raise their hand. I have been asked to put my name in the hat for positions earlier in my career that it would not have even occurred to me. So I think it's really important to identify the people who have high potential, whether men or women, and encourage them to put their name in the hat and to progress. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's move to another question here and about Elsevier in the RELX group. And I think it's interesting, before it's anything else, that even someone like me who pays some attention to what's going on in publishing, I didn't even know that RELX existed. I thought it was still Reed Elsevier these years later. And so it was interesting to me to read about your progression through RELX. But the press release that announced you as the CEO of Elsevier mentions that you're Chief Strategy Officer of RELX, as well as the chair of RELX's Chief Technology Officers Forum. So, again, I think of Elsevier as a publisher. This doesn't sound like a publisher's background, And then the release says that you are intimately familiar with the transition from digital reference to digital decision tools and the deployment of artificial intelligence technologies such as machine learning and natural language processing that spark Elsevier's strategic vision. So there's a lot in that.
Yes, I think this makes me look probably a little bit more qualified than I actually am.
Well, and I guess, with all that information packed into that statement, I guess probably many of us wonder, what is this transition from digital reference to a digital decision tool, first of all? It's a
lot of words that doesn't necessarily mean something. So let me try to bring a bit more clarity to that. Businesses like RELX, our legacy and our core value proposition and our heart and soul is content. And across RELX, we serve scientists, doctors, lawyers, risk professionals, and we always had the tradition and the business models around providing them with the content and the data sets they need to make decisions as professionals. And at Elsevier, we do that through our publishing information as well. To me, technology changes the way people consume content. So print was a huge invention, and that was the way we all consumed content for centuries. And then digital came along, and that became the way we consume information. And electronic decision tools is just the third wave of that. It's still very much content and data driven, because I always say garbage in, garbage out. If you actually don't focus on the real high quality data and content sets, there isn't much value you can create. But what has happened, especially over the last decade with machine learning and artificial intelligence technologies, we can now treat textual content almost like numbers. And you can actually extract a lot of entities from text. You can link them, you can disambiguate them, and you can create linkages, which enables you to do analytics. And that, to me, is just the next wave. It's a different way of consuming the information from print and digital dissemination. It's actually putting analytics on top of it. I think professionals will always go back to the primary source, but this analytics helps them just look at the overall picture before they dig in. So lawyers, for example, we have tools for lawyers where if you're a medical malpractice litigator, you may want to understand what is the probability of winning a malpractice case for mistreatment of breast cancer, given the facts of the case and the previous precedent. And you can get a probability that says it's 60% and the payout may be X to Y. but then you dig into the relevant cases to really understand and build your judgment. And to me, that's the transition. And we hope to do that for researchers as well, by extracting more entities from the literature, whether that's funders, patents, concepts, which I think might really help for interdisciplinary research if you can start creating linkages, and that's what we're focused on right now.
And
it's
so
not easy to do.
An example then of a digital decision tool is a tool you would then have, a lawyer would use to aid in their decision making, or a doctor would aid in bedside diagnosis and whatnot. And so, and then you've spoken of other kinds of entities you draw from it. So machine learning, basically, as I understand it, you know, is that you have training data, which then is the basis for producing the AI.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And you can have structured or unstructured data, or supervised or unsupervised. There's lots of different techniques that you can use. But ultimately, what you want to do is understand what the machine spits out and use the expertise we have with our publishers and our product and technologist folks to say, how accurate was that? And now you retrain the algorithms to get better recall and precision. Those are the things we measure to make sure the actual, and the machines help you get a long way there. What you can do this obviously with human effort, but it's just not scalable. So the machines enable you to get there faster and in a way where you can scale it and afford it.
And so is the data you feed them, is it uniquely Elsevier data?
We have all kinds of different models. It could be uniquely Elsevier data. It can be publicly available data. It can be data we license from other parties. So Scopus is a good example where we do license the literature, and then we actually analyze the abstracts based on that. So there's in our other parts of Relics, we have contributory databases where customers feel if everybody contributes, then you get the full picture and you just need the analytics on top of it. So many ways it could be proprietary licensing, it could be creating new data sets, or it could be contributory data sets, or publicly available information.
So I'm just trying to get a foundation to think about these things. So the relationship between the data or the content that has been the basis of Elsevier for 140 years and these digital decision tools isn't just that only that data produces the digital decision tools. Is there a specific relationship between being able to build these tools, which presumably are for any market? It's presumably not only for analyzing or working with Elsevier's data. So is that an advantage in having that huge back file of data to be able to build these that nobody else can get their hands on?
Of course, I think data, the more data you have, the more compelling is your tool. And we do share data across with our sister divisions. So our patents data for Elsevier actually comes from LexisNexis, because patents data is used in legal. For this medical malpractice product I've told you about, LexisNexis uses Elsevier data to understand the guidelines and whether there was actually malpractice. So we do share data where it's appropriate for specific use cases.
That's interesting. So in the sense that you are making a transition from a digital reference to digital decision tools, what does that transition from to actually mean for what we see in the last sentence as sparking Elsevier's strategic vision?
So I think the vision is to create more value for professionals so they can make better decisions, and they can make those decisions faster, and they can connect more dots. The way to do it is mining the content and linking the content. And specific examples of tools we have is SciVal is a good example today. It actually analyzes billions of records to understand how an institution is performing in their research, how a country is performing, where they actually have the most collaborations with, which countries, which disciplines, where is the most funding going to. We're now looking at actually whether research is in line with Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has. So that's a good analytics tool when you step back, if you are the president of an institution or if you're actually shaping research strategy for a country, you can actually see where your strengths are, where your dollars are going, where you have distinctive capabilities, and where you may want to shift where you invest in research. So that would be an example of a decision tool. We have on the health side via oncology, which is around pathways in oncology. So there's a lot of literature on oncology, and it's an area that actually progresses rapidly with clinical trials. And what we have built with, again, input from doctors and the literature is to say, what are the best pathways in a specific cancer case? And we get really good adoption from oncologists because they want to make sure that the new learning is reflected on the pathways. And there's a standard that everybody agrees. There will always be deviations from that because the doctor will use their judgment based on the patient's circumstances. But that's a good example of mining sort of the best available information to give a standard of care that, again, doctors will always use their judgment, but that's a referential tool for them to say, this is what best practice is today.
Okay. Just one quick thing.
Sure.
How long does the data in your back files remain relevant to creating these AIs?
It really depends on what kind of data you're talking about. So in legal, there's still seminal case laws that may be from 30, 40 years ago that shapes the way law is practiced. And in science, I think you really need to look at it by discipline. So in mathematics, you can say there are still papers that remain very, very relevant today, whereas in computer science, things may become not as relevant within 12 to 24 months. So I think it depends on what the discipline is and what the profession does.
Okay.
And I guess I was wondering what this seeming emphasis on digital decision tools will mean for libraries as part of Elsevier's market going forward. Do you think they will fade in importance as researchers become more important? Do you see that happening?
I don't think that at all, and I think if you look at the transition from print to digital, librarians have played actually a key leading role in the adoption of those tools. Researchers have always been the end user of the content, and librarians have always been the guardian of the knowledge and knowledge dissemination for their institutions. So they will remain critical in analyzing the data, making the right decisions for the institution, making sure that what is being done is consistent with the mission of the institutions. Librarians also, I think, have a unique vantage point because most institutions have different colleges that may focus on one or two, whereas librarians look at the institution as a whole, and they are the ones, I think, who connect the dots between different schools to optimize the right decision for the institution overall versus maybe parts of the institution. So I actually don't see that changing going forward, and what I see with librarians, as I talked about my speech earlier today too, they're really evolving their role in terms of doing a lot around data management, working towards reproducibility, supporting researchers with that, working on supporting the institution with decision tools and analytics as they set their strategy. So as publishers evolve the way we serve our customers, I see librarians evolving in how they work with their stakeholders in an institution to make sure that mission is accomplished for an institution. And we look forward to partnering with librarians going forward to work on these tools as well.
So you're seeing librarians taking, in some ways, an advisory role on helping faculty determine what decision-making tools might be most appropriate.
Exactly.
And then linking among schools and so on, because they have an overall perspective for the university.
And the way these decision tools work in a lot of different industries is there will always be industry data, but you also have institutional data. And you usually have to marry the insights from the institutional data, and that is the institution's role. And I see librarians sometimes in conjunction with technology groups in the institution that needs to enable these tools, taking that role within their institutions.
Libraries seem to be moving away from the big deal.
Yeah.
and bundled subscriptions, to open access and transformative agreements. And I'm wondering, how is Elsevier reacting to this? Really, it's a transition in the market that is really it's shaking things up, and I'm just wondering how you all are going to react to it.
We're going to enable open access for customers and institutions who want to go in the open access route. I think our job is to serve our customers and find pragmatic and sustainable paths forward based on what they're trying to achieve. So that's our commitment to the customer bases we have. There are, and I've covered this in my speech, and I also said I'm a UC Berkeley alumna.
Right.
So I cannot help myself but completely subscribe to the beauty of freely available information that actually can be disseminated. And going back to my previous discussion around electronic decision tools, the more content is available, the more you can actually do meaningful analytics. I mean, we have 18% of the content, but if you have more of it, you can actually build better algorithms. So to me, the question is not a debate around whether open access is good or bad. It is around who wants to accomplish in which way, and what are the real structural challenges that we need to overcome. And they are real. And I think we need to have trust-based, open conversations and problem solve, customer by customer, to say how can we move forward. And we have had a few deals since I started. I consider them pilots because we're doing very different things. I'm a big proponent of testing and learning. That means you'll also test and fail most of the time. Some of these things will work, others won't. But the only way to learn and make progress is to test. And in the deals that we have had so far, we're testing different ways and different approaches. And I'm hoping as customers allow us to share our learnings, we will, so the community can benefit from what may work or what may not work. But usually the three primary challenges around open access is first, researcher adoption. I think some researchers absolutely are committed to driving open access. Others like the idea, but it's not a priority for them, so they don't necessarily want to change their behavior. So we need to continue to educate the researcher community, show the benefits. The second one is around funding flows, because the funding flows change when you pay to publish versus pay to read. And if you take this to the end game and say we're in a 100% open access world, research intensive institutions will pay a bigger piece of the pie, even if the pie is smaller. And that is challenging. So you have to figure out ways of figuring out how this transition works. And U15 in Germany released a statement about a month ago saying we're absolutely committed to open access, we're absolutely committed to deal negotiations, but we have to solve this funding issue. So that's a real challenge, and I think publishers can absolutely play a role in supporting this, but that won't be sufficient. The stakeholders need to come together to move this forward. And then lastly, we just need to watch out. The peer review system is actually, for somebody like me who comes from the outside to the research community, it's a really unique system. I mean, you have actually a global community determining what good science is, and the pure motivation there is to contribute to science. And every time you change an incentive system, and that has always been around curation, because we reject about 75% of the articles that's submitted to Elsevier every year. We get 1.8 million submissions. We publish 25% of them. And every time you change an incentive system, there are intended and unintended consequences. And we've saw predatory publishing as an unintended consequence. And I think we just need to be careful in how we change the system, because science, to me, is a currency of truth, and it's something that public really trusts in, and it's funded by R&D dollars. And we just need to make sure as we go through this transition and as we change incentive systems, we don't break that basic principle around trust and integrity of science.
I do have a follow-up question to this. You spoke in your keynote about the importance of building bridges and how you are committed to doing that. And this morning there was an article that appeared that discussed the breakdown in negotiation with UC. between Elsevier and UC, and that students there no longer have access to Elsevier's.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what would a bridge look like between Elsevier and UC to restore access to Elsevier journals and materials to those students?
Sure, and I mean, I won't give you specifics because it's obviously a key customer for us, and I would love. Well, let me say a couple of things. One is, as a UC Berkeley alum, I think the UC system canceled just a few weeks after I took on my role, and that was a knife in the heart for me. I'll just be honest about that. And I was actually I was in California last week doing customer visits and met with lots of different stakeholders from the UC system, and it was exactly to do what you are asking. What does it mean to build a bridge? I think to build a bridge, you need to do real listening, to understand what are the obstacles to make progress, and then you need to pragmatically solve them, and that it takes two to tango when you're problem solving. And I was very encouraged by the interactions I had with the UC system last week, because I think there is a real will to build that bridge, and now we really need to figure out the mechanics around it. Yeah.
Do you have any idea what of a timeline where we might see some results?
I don't, but I would like it to be as soon as possible. I don't think the current situation is good for the UC system, for researchers, or for Elsevier.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting to think about how, I mean, you were talking about case-by-case dealing with open access. Things like Plan S aren't really case-by-case. That's pretty systemic.
Yeah.
So I wonder to what extent it would be different for you to deal with systemic change versus case-by-case, and probably case-by-case is more like what Elsevier is accustomed to dealing with customers.
Yeah.
And also just how, well, let me just go with that. I'll ask the other later.
Sure. I think you start case by case before you can bring systematic change, because I think you learn from the case by case. And in my experience, and this is not to say this is the absolute truth, because people have different experiences, systematic change that hasn't been tested and thought through can also not be the right outcome. So I always tell everybody, let's take risk, but let's take calculated risks. You don't want to jump from the 20th floor because that could break something really badly.
Yes, it could.
But let's jump from the second floor, because the worst that can happen is a sprained ankle, and you can fix that. So I do think it's really important to learn from the case by case before you do anything systematic, and that's what we'll aim to do.
Yeah, I know when I was listening to Michael Mabe yesterday talking about Plan S and so on, and that's a pretty uneven process itself. So it's not as if it's imminent that it's going to just change everything. But they're looking to change publishers, not to encourage researchers. So I think that's where I think it would be a different dynamic.
Yeah, and I think you've also seen the reaction from the societies, and we shouldn't forget them as well. There's a significant number of societies, and when we're doing the deals that we're doing, what we're trying to say to our society partners is we're going to just protect your economics as we learn, because they are much smaller to be able to take the risks with this transition. We're larger. So I think you need to think through all the different stakeholders, and yes, there are the big publishers that are for profit, but there's also a lot of societies that are trying to figure out how this change is going to impact them.
Yeah. And I guess one of the other thing I was interested in is when you were talking about peer review and about quality and the maintenance of standards in an environment in which there's lots of things like predatory publishers. I do wonder, are you developing tools that are useful in that environment?
Yes, no, we're actually doing a lot around peer review, and we're working with our Data Institute partners around the globe. So we have different partnerships with different universities, and we're looking at how can you systematically identify fraud, manipulated citations, manipulated images. We've just done a huge piece of work on all of our research using machine learning to look at if there were citation manipulation by peer reviewers. And we've identified ones where there might be the case, and we're investigating those. So I think you can use that to continue to uphold a better and higher standard in the peer review process. There's also we're also thinking through how to evolve the anonymity and the credit components
right.
of
That's a
peer
big
review.
issue.
And I have spoken to a lot of researchers around this, and there's a real wide range of views. So again, I think it's best to test and try and learn from it. And there's some good experiments outside of Elsevier that I think we can learn from as well, that people have shared with me. And then we are also looking at things like, is the submission the right fit for the journal? Because you can use machine learning to make those decisions. Again, it would aid the editor's judgment. It would never replace it, but it makes their life easier when you can actually give them a sense of what's the fit. You can look at the originality of the article, again, using machine learning. So we're experimenting with a lot of different things of that nature.
That's very interesting.
Do you have one more question about that?
Okay. So my one last question. What do you think will be the most fundamental change in scholarly publishing by 2025?
It's a fantastic question, and we should go back and look at this, and we'll probably be wrong. But I think
we won't hold you to it.
Thank you. It's good to say these things on record, because then you can see how the world has changed. I think what I would like to see is real progress on reproducibility of research. I think that will really move the needle in terms of the scientific progress that we make. I also would like to see real progress in interdisciplinary research. I feel like that's the next frontier, if we can. And the Nobel Prize for Economics this year was very inspiring, I think, to see how you can take methods from different practices and apply it to a different discipline and how effective it can be. And then thirdly, I'd like to really see the research evaluation system evolve, because citations and quantity are good metrics. We look at Net Promoter Score. It's a good metric. It's not sufficient. It's just one piece of data. I think the more sophisticated we can actually have an evaluation framework, the easier it is for researchers to show the impact that they have on the progress, and for funders to think through where should they invest their limited funds to make progress. From what I've seen, I think there'll be meaningful progress in all those three areas by 2025.
Excellent. Good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And actually, there is one more question before we let you go. And I usually ask this to make sure we haven't missed anything. And if you were sitting in Matthew or my chair, what question would you ask yourself?
I can conclusively say you haven't missed anything. I think you have covered everything I would have asked myself.
That's a great way of getting at it. Okay. That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate
Thank
it
you very
again
much
for coming by, and I've learned a tremendous amount by just chatting here today. Thank you.
It's genuinely my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.